2, 3, go. Hello everyone, it's CM Kozaman again. And today I got a treat for you. Boy, do I have a treat for you. Okay, let's go to full screen mode. Alright. Today we're going to be talking about a lot of cryptid profiles and a lot of other things, but specifically we're going to be talking about snail and slug cryptids. That is to say, we're going to be talking about gastropod cryptids. Now, I started this maybe, it's going to be a 15-minute short video or whatever, but it quickly ballooned out of proportion, but in a good way. So without further ado, let's go and look at a wide diversity of snail and slug cryptids in Western culture and beyond. But before beginning, here are a few rules of the Kozaman house. Rule 1. Always play these videos at 1.75 or even 2 times the speed with the YouTube speed controls, so it makes me sound like a cooler guy and I waste less of your time. Number 2, please subscribe to this channel and click the little fucking bell icon on the corner so you get updates when there's a new video. And number 3, this is a great big video and this channel is not monetized and I probably never will monetize it, so it always helps if you like this video just to donate me $1 on Patreon per month. Please support me on Patreon. Every penny makes a difference, and if you support me on Patreon, you'll be able to download this entire podcast, download this entire PowerPoint or slideshow, and then in the next few days you're going to be able to see the exclusive snail monster drawings that I'm gonna upload there. Nobody else is gonna be able to see them. Okay, so here we go. But before starting on snail cryptids, let's look at real life gastropods a bit, because this is about snail cryptids, so it's only fair to look at snails and relatives a little before proceeding. Now, gastropods are a huge group of mollusks. They're extremely diverse. You got all the weird kinds of seashells, the sea minarets, as we call them, or you got the weird half-shell slugs, or the normal slugs, or the sea slugs, or their relatives, or the land snails, and there's actually a couple of different groups of land snails that are quite distinct from each other, but they're an extremely diverse group. You got all sorts of weird snails and slugs on land. They're unbelievably diverse. Like, if you go to any part of the world, if you go to a rural setting, chances are, if you rustle around the undergrowth a bit, you're gonna find some snail shells. And here's one of my hobbies. I always collect snail shells and geotag them by jar. So I get quite an extensive collection of snail shells. And, I made some pretty surprising discoveries. Actually, in 2018 or 2019, I established a species record for a Floridian snail all the way in southwestern Turkey, and just goes to show how underappreciated and unbelievably diverse this group is. So that's why I love snails, and in fact that's why I chose snail cryptids and I didn't choose bird cryptids or reptile cryptids or frog cryptids, but I might get around to frog cryptids in the future, who knows. Anyways, so let's go look at a few snails and relatives, because they're just so cool and arguably they're more interesting than actual cryptids. First, we have Powellifanta, the giant predatory snail that's found only in New Zealand. Basically, these guys walk around the undergrowth and eat worms. They're enormous. They make really good pets. Here's one on somebody's hand. Just a great flesh-eating pet. But of course, they are, I think, very difficult to raise and critically endangered. So then, speaking of predators, we got the real OG monster, Conus textile, or Conus textile, whatever you want to spell that. It's the predatory conch snail that's found underwater. So these guys have this poison injector, and they got these like big suction siphon. So this expands like a big tube, almost like a sleeping bag, and envelops the poor fish, and it's devoured. And this is just so interesting because, normally you associate sea snails as slow things, but no, there are some species that are quite fast and quite vicious. So if you're looking for cryptids, this is cooler than them all, arguably. And this, I think, was the inspiration behind this painting. I saw this painting when I was younger, and it always stayed with me. It's this kind of conch shell alien on a seashore by the inimitable great artist Bob Eggleton. Just look up this name. He's a great artist, and this is his rendition of a conch alien just chilling on a beach somewhere. This is my OG ultimate body form. This is how I would like to exist. Just scraping around near a warm sea, not quite swimming, not quite walking, enjoying the good life. Okay, let's go. Then we got Chrysomallon squamiferum, squamous from the shells. So basically they are like they can be white or they can be black. They are found in the deepest part of the ocean. They're marine snails, and their foot is riddled with these metallic looking scales that protect them from the extreme temperatures, or I don't know, extreme corrosive gases in their environment. But they basically look like this heavy metal as F. And then there's Platymathoidea, found in Malaysia. Now these guys are also known as volcano snails, but they're underwater volcano snails. Now this guy, Platymathoidea, is a terrestrial volcano snail. It inhabits a volcanic environment near Malaysia, if I'm not mistaken, and it's critically endangered. They're really cool. Like every snail there, I guess, quite easy to take care of, but because of this reason, they are being exported in unholy numbers, and they are endangered. I think it doesn't make any sense to keep a big snail if they're not from your part of the world. And actually, in many parts of the world, you have quite enormous snails and slugs, so keep them as pets, and they're just cooler. Of course, who can mention giant snails without talking about Achatina species, SPA, the giant African snail? They're quite enormous. Like, they make, okay, exotic species or not, I would love to keep these guys at home. They're so friendly looking, so beautiful. They're bigger than some puppies and kittens, so it's just amazing. They're huge, they're friendly, they just like to move around. And you know, there are many videos online with people and these snails having nice pet owner interactions. So let's go. Then there's Zospeum tolossum. It's a small tiny snail. Just looks like this. Pamby namby. Look at this little cute thing. It's either a dust mote or it's probably the thing's eye. But what makes this thing so special is that it's like a few millimeters long, very delicate, but it's been recorded at an unholy habitat, these deep cavernous abyssal caves in, I think, in what is now present-day Croatia. In fact, there was a big research paper about these. So, like, this particular species, Zospeum tolossum, was recovered from an unnamed large chamber at the bottom of this amazing cave, the Lukina Jama cave, named after one of the heroes of the Croatian War of Independence, when Europe cruelly watched former Yugoslavia tear itself apart, and they could not be happier about it. You know, I mean, if there is a God, there's going to be hell to pay for this, for Germany and also all the other friendly EU nations. They saw a competing large company, they saw a competing large country, and they just watched it destroy itself. Shame. Anyways, moving on to snails though, I mean, this is really amazing. So it lives in the Stygian depths of this one particular cave, almost a kilometer deep. And that's where it's been recovered from. People have been seeing their empty shells here and there, but the live specimen, they only found it in the extreme depth. And probably around Europe, but around all parts of the world, there are thousands of such cryptic, beautiful, strange snail species waiting to be discovered. Talk about cryptids, here's a genuine one, a new species of snail found in an unearthly habitat. Then we got Pleurobranchia californica, the Californian giant sea hare. They are like big slug-like things that live in the sea. It's just cool and predatory. It eats smaller animals of all sorts. It's just, I include it here because it looks like somebody's idea of a giant cryptid snail, but in fact it's real, so there. And then we got Selenoclamis ypsrida. I hope I'm not butchering the pronunciation. Selenoclamis ypsrida. It's a giant pale, moon pale, predatory slug that eats other slugs, snails, and worms. What's coolest about this thing is it's been described in 2006, quite recently, actually, very recently, and it's been discovered in Wales, I believe. So in the UK, in one of the most quote-unquote developed and civilized parts of the world. I mean, in the UK, people can name species of fly by species level accuracy. So that's something. But even there, a new species was lurking. The Selenoclamis, I think it means Selene is the moon, so the pale moon snail or something. Just really cool. And then you got the giant slug that most of us can find in Eurasia and basically boreal regions, Arion. But what makes it cryptid-like is it's one thing it's been observed to do. But this is Arion. It's a big chunky snail, a slug that you see all over the place. In my part of the world, people place cat food on their doorsteps. So every summer, these giant slugs come up and share the cat food. But they're really ravenous eaters. They're ravenous eaters in other ways too, because recently they've been observed like climbing up birds' nests and just killing and eating baby birds in a really disgusting way. I mean, they eat the softest parts first and just leave them to bleed and die. So what they do is they like come up and scrape the eyeballs. I have pictures of these, but I'm not going to show them. They scrape the eyeballs off of the poor chicks and just consume and devour them. Nature is awful like this sometimes. And of course, when this discovery was reported in 2016, it made all sorts of sensational headlines. Giant slugs are breaking into bird nests and eating the chicks. Giant slugs snack on baby birds. Certain slimy slugs nosh on chicks as bird parents do nothing and stop them. They're those bad bird parents. They just eat hot chip and lie as the slugs nosh them. So this is almost certainly a British outlet. And then monster slugs are devouring defenseless baby birds in nests. Oh my god, what is the world coming to? And then my favorite, the hunter has become the hunted in the age-old battle between slug and bird. You can almost see this like as a prologue to a very serious Ridley Scott film. So imagine there's this like really deep, dark, and emotional soundtrack and just a black screen. The hunter has become the hunted in the age-old battle between slug and bird. It's the year 2016. And then one of the researchers studying this phenomena said, we couldn't believe that the slug had killed the nestlings. They had killed the younglings too. We talked to many experienced ornithologists, but none of them had observed slug predatory behavior towards birds before. It really is an awful bird. By the way, Arion, the scientific name for these slugs, is actually from this kind of like weird, hot-looking Hellenistic either goddess or a hero figure. Basically, long story short, Arion was a very talented lyre player, so much that like he was almost a semi-god or something. So somehow he wound up on a pirate ship, and the pirates were like, okay, we'll chuck him off the ship and kill him. So they chucked him off, but then he started playing his magical lyre. And then a dolphin came up. This is classical people's understanding of a dolphin, with the head of a panther, legs of a horse, feet of a duck, appendages of a fish or a whale. Perfectly normal. Anyways, the dolphin was so enchanted by Arion's music that he was like, I'm a fan for you. I'll take you anywhere you like. So Arion was like, I'm dying out here. Please take me to my destination near the very tip of the Peloponnese Peninsula. So the dolphin did so and actually died on land while doing this. So then Arion recovered and he met up with the local king. So together they built a tomb for the dolphin, this bizarre creature. Then the pirates came around and the king saw the pirates coming. So he said to Arion, you should hide in the dolphin's cemetery monument and I'll talk to the pirates. So the king talks to the pirates. They're on land. The pirates are like, hey, king, what's up? And the king is like, not much. Hey, what'd you do up there? And the pirates are like, well, there was this weirdo with the lyre, so he killed him. The king is like, are you sure? Yeah, man. I mean, what else? We killed him, right? Fair and square. Okay. Then suddenly Arion walks out of the dolphin crypt, and then the tyrant is like, you guys are a bunch of no good murderers, and he tortured and killed them all. That's basically the myth of Arion, which lent its name to this slug, which eats the eyes of birds. Isn't life amazing? I mean, this is the kind of enjoyment you derive from life when you're able to study science, history, mythology, all of these things together. So I strongly recommend that. And without much ado, now we've seen a lot of exemplary snails and slugs that are just amazing. In fact, I could go on just classifying all sorts of land and sea gastropods, but then the video would be 18 hours long. So let's move on to our money shots, what we all came here for. But first, let me take a sip. Okay, so throughout the lore of cryptozoology, there are a number of gastropod cryptids. One of them, the first one, is the Mulilo slug, which has been observed in near the Congo River. It's a giant slug-like creature, and it says it's like 6 feet long and 12 inches wide, so actually like a snake. It's grayish white in color, and it's been observed in the Congo River near the Mulilo region. I don't know where it is on this map, but it should be somewhere around here. Basically, this map is twice the size of France, but somewhere around here. So people catch them in cages because their flesh has magical properties. Now, the depiction we saw here really resembles Tuli monstrum, this ancient Carboniferous era fossil that people cannot really classify. It's got this kind of long proboscis or like things like eyes or halteres on the side. So this reconstruction was seriously inspired by Tuli monstrum. But it also kind of looks like one of those pterarchaeoid marine snails. People call them sea elephants. Basically, these are genuine snails. The shell is really tiny. It's just been reduced to a nub. The animal is very long. The foot is kind of enlarged into a fin. And the proboscis, the mouth, is a kind of like, this quickly takes water in, so it helps it capture small animals. It's a kind of snail's way of garage kit retro-engineering a fish. And they're just really nifty animals. They're beautiful, transparent, unbelievable. They call them little sea elephants. So what is the Mulilo slug? So in this throughout this video, we're going to do this. We're going to have a verdict for each cryptid, okay? And the probable verdict for this is a misidentified animal or a total fabrication, because many of these Congolese giant dinosaurs or weird animals, people go up to the natives and they say, hey, have you seen any strange animals around? As if, almost in a condescending, insulting way. So it's not uncommon for the natives to make up creatures for the quote-unquote researchers to impress them. So a lot of dinosaur cryptids get reported from these areas in a way. So I guess it's just a total fabrication or a misidentified animal. Maybe it could be something like a lungfish or a big, what did you call them? Those amphibians without legs. Oh my god, my memory is deserting me. Caecilian, yeah, maybe a giant Caecilian, who knows? But what if it was really real? Like, what could it be? Maybe it could be a gigantic otter, because you have giant otters in Brazil, and they're huge, shiny black animals. So if it's 2 meters long, and, okay, these otters are, I guess, a bit more than 12 inches wide, but hell, still, it's a sleek animal. So imagine if this cryptid was real, as they depicted it, and chances are it would be a giant otter. Basically, we're engaging in speculative evolution creature making here, just trying to find out the logical explanation, the nearest best thing. And this is my explanation. What else it could be? If you have an idea, mention it in the comments, because we're going to do this with all cryptids we're going to be studying here. Okay, next up is the Loch Ness giant slug. Of course, the Loch Ness monster has been talked about so much that it probably needs its own podcast and own discussion. But one of the strangest explanations for the Loch Ness monster is the probability that it might be a giant slug. So an artist named Oberon Zell made this really detailed diagram and this really detailed illustration, basically trying to explain how it could be a gigantic lake slug. So it adapted all parts of the slug anatomy into this kind of package and just went with it. And it's one of the most original explanations for the Loch Ness Monster myth. It probably was inspired by these sketches of Nessie, supposedly drawn on site by a certain Alastair Dallas. This sketch is very famous among Loch Ness researchers. It shows a creature almost like a, well, it does quite look like a mollusk. It doesn't look like a plesiosaur at all. A slimy looking creature with like drooping flesh parts, a mouth almost without jaws, a kind of like long neck, but like small forelimbs. So, if you see this sketch and you base your things off of it, then, something like this is not really implausible, let us say. So, it is after the Dallas sketches. And actually, there's a book named The Great Orm of Loch Ness that says, basically says it could be a giant slug, but probably it says it's a gigantic version of the Thule monster, Thule monstrum, which we saw earlier when we were dealing with the Mulilo slug. So, we were not the first people to come up with the explanation, let us say. But there are even wilder explanations out there. I mean, some people think that the Loch Ness Monster is a gigantic, extremely divergent cephalopod with a big trunk. Remember those sea elephants we saw? These things with the big trunks? So they basically imagined this kind of giant squid-like thing. They even named it scientifically. They called it Dinotutus proboscideus, a hypothesis brought forward by a certain Doc Shields. And it's a giant squid, but with a very divergent anatomy. It's got a kind of trunk-like organ, like those sea elephants. And the real tentacles, they've been atrophied, except for the little two arms here that kind of look like fins or flaplets, I don't know. So basically they saw the same sketch, but they tried to retro-engineer it into a cephalopod. Now, at this point, you realize probably that in cryptozoology, these explanations are very flexible. People, it's like Lego. Like you see one silhouette, you see one body shape, and you try to cram any kind of animal into that silhouette, basically. So we've seen slug Nessie, squid Nessie. Chances are you could even make the argument that it's a hyper-derived bird or an extremely divergent monkey. Who knows? But it's just a fun act of speculative evolution. In fact, that's why my good friend John Conway called cryptozoology the world's longest running speculative evolution project. So our verdict is the Loch Ness Monster, slug, snail, cephalopod or whatever is probably a local tall tale built over and over by mistakes in human memory, gullibility, and the hidden but ever-present desire to be famous. Maybe it could be a vagrant seal, I don't know, maybe somehow a seal got trapped there or even was introduced there. So that's my strict verdict, But what if it was real? Well, then we could engage in a bit of molluscan speculation of our own, and we could call it a giant mobile form of the geoduck. The geoducks are also mollusks, quite related to snails and their relatives, but they're these two bivalve creatures with this enormous proboscis. They live buried in sediment and they make really good eating. But in my mind, if it were real, maybe it could be a giant geoduck that kind of has little fins here, so it kind of flips and flops about, almost like a lake monster. Anyways, then we got the more ancient Lagarflot worm. So this is all the way from Iceland, and in 2012 it was actually observed in a really strange, convincing looking video. Now I'm not going to show you the video, but this screen grab should explain it. It's like this kind of tangled silhouette like thing, and it's articulated here, and here on these nodes, so it really swims about. It's either a forgery or something real, something extraordinary. So much that Icelanders, the locals, in typical Nordic fashion, formed a little committee to verify this video. And the chairman of the Serpent Video Verification Committee said, when this video surfaced, it touched us all deeply. It's a story everyone knows, all the way from the 14th century. We need to honor that history and folklore. And they were actually quite defensive because some people are saying it's a fake, and they say, you can't say it's a fake. I mean, of course, it's a video, it shows something. And then in very true postmodern tradition, he says, in a certain sense, the monster exists even if it only exists in the story. I mean, Baudrillard could not have said this better. But Stefan Bogi, chairman of the Icelandic Serpent Video Verification Committee, just said it better. Of course, then some smart person came up and said, just a fucking fishing net that broke free when it became filled with ice, and it really sounds convincing that way. So hats off to Louis Chidwick, or should we call you Louis Chadwick or Louis Giga Chadwick, for like explaining, blasting away this postmodernist desire to believe in this monster. But the Lagarflot worm is quite an ancient cryptid, let us say. And from a book of creatures, this amazing website dedicated to cryptids, we're going to see more of them in the upcoming slides. We are told that it's been cited all the way in the 15th and the 17th and the 16th centuries. Sometimes it's seen on riverbanks, spewing massive amounts of poisoning the land, just making a mess. Of course, there are a lot of worm or globe cryptids that I'm just going to skip. This particular cryptid, I just included it in this podcast because, as you're about to see, there are references of it being slug-like, or at least people call it a slug. So for that reason, we're going to include it here. It's a very old myth, as I just told you. In a 1585 map of Iceland, there's a notification in Latin, and it's translated into, in this lake appears a large serpent, which poses a menace to the inhabitants and appear when some memorable event is imminent. So it's like a portent of bad things happening, I guess. There's even a legend about this, and this is where the slug explanation comes from. Basically, there was a local legend in the Lagarflot region, I guess. So there is a girl, and her mother gave the girl some gold. So she put it under a black slug. But then the slug started growing, maybe powered by the gold or powered by greed or something. It grew so big that the girl was forced to throw it into the lake together with the gold. So the worm grew out of proportion, started terrorizing the countryside, killing people and animals. Just a bad slug or worm or whatever. And then the Icelanders commissioned 2 Finns to destroy it and retrieve the gold. But they could only succeed in tying it to the lake bottom, because turns out at the bottom of the lake, in a typical anime season finale form, there was even a larger dragon. So that's why we're including the larger dragon as a slug cryptid, just because this girl called it a heath worm or a black slug. Anyways, it sounds a bit like that 1980s musical film, The Little Shop of Horrors, doesn't it? A creature, extraordinary creature, first small and innocuous, starts out small and then grows big and becomes threatening. Anyways, and also doesn't help that nearby the Lagarflot region, there's another cryptid named the Scrimsel, and it's got the most amazing form. It's like this triple hourglass with the head of a seal. Probably it just was a seal, who knows? But then maybe those two could be the same creature. So it's verdict time, ladies and gents. What do you think the Lagarflot worm was? Once again, the explanation is either a vagrant seal or some swimming cows or some shit, or a local tall tale. Because people just love telling legends. We got a need for mystical experience that's as strong as the need for friendship or the need to be loved or the need to be admired. Never forget that. But what if it was really something like a giant worm snail thing in the sea or in that fjord? Then I postulate maybe it could be a giant pyrosome. Now, pyrosomes are these colonial animals like this, and they form this kind of enormous tubes that they are quite big. So, it's not quite outside the realm of possibility for there to be a giant pyrosome, maybe, if it was real. I cannot verify though if it guards any gold or not. Anyways, moving on. We got the Sashamama creature. But first, I just remembered my Charlemagne. Let my armies be the rocks and the birds in the sky. Anyways, moving on with Sashamama. So this is a Latin American cryptid from the Paraguay region. I might be confusing the country. It's from deep Latin America though, that's for sure. And our information about this creature comes mostly from Mr. Karl Shuker's amazing Shukernature website. And basically it's this kind of conch-like giant snake monster with multiple ears and antenna and a monster's face basically. And to make things more interesting, the local Moche people, but before we get to them, please, we're promoting Mr. Karl Shuker's amazing website, Shukernature. Please visit it. I used it as my primary source for this creature and for some other details throughout this presentation. Shukernature at karlshuker.blogspot.com. Also, if you're interested in cryptozoology in any form, you have to get all the books that Karl Shuker has ever written. He's a really detailed and thorough investigator of lore, and he does go out on flights of fancy, but he's actually quite based. And somewhere throughout the middle of his career, he probably began to understand the value of cryptozoology as folklore, and just dedicated himself even more into the chronicling of cryptids and cryptid lore. And all of his books are beautiful. They got this kind of like, they're full of individuality, and my hats off. Mr. Shuker, if you're watching this video, have a nice day. I've been a big fan ever since I was a kid. Anyways, to make things more interesting about this Sashamama creature, you got designs depicting such a thing, like a cone snail-like dragon monster on the pottery produced by the local Moche culture. And they're quite big on snails and pottery designs actually, because we know that the Moche people probably hunted for snails. They were part of their diet, maybe even a delicacy. So there are like pottery designs showing people collecting snails. And there are even like pots shaped like snails, so they're quite important for them. So, you know, you see these, you see this, and then you see these. Like, so what's this like? Is it a kind of mother of all snails kind of monster? Who knows? But Moche pottery is really interesting, especially in these forms. Oh my God, what are you doing there? It's shulibili bing bong time over there at Moche country. But you know, they're just like all human beings. Everybody likes a good time, whether they admit it or not. And in 1997, at the Nueva Tacna region, there was something enormous, a phenomenon like a landslide or something like a bulldozer passed through the forest and like leveled all the trees, and people claimed it was the doings of the Sashamama. So whether it was really a giant snail dragon, we will never know. But to make things even more interesting, around this region people still find fossilized glyptodont shells. Well, glyptodonts were these gigantic panther-like relatives of the armadillo with club tails on some species. They're quite diverse, and they died out quite recently. In fact, it was possible that first people settling the regions were contemporaneous with these animals. So they lived alongside the glyptodonts and probably contributed to their extinction. So it's not completely outside the realm of possibility for the local people to find these. It could even be like a deep historic memory of the animals themselves, but they just found these fossils, or maybe they remembered them, or both, and then just imagined them as these like dragon snails, which kind of combined with this. And anyways, so let's come up to the verdict section. Probably it's a legend, improved somewhat by the presence of glyptodon fossils, but what if it was real? It probably would be an actual glyptodont, you know? You don't need a cone snail, you just need one of these gigantic beasts. And they're just unbelievable. I wish they were still around. And even these accurate reconstructions, they really resemble these, especially this kind of design, don't they? They have an ear, I mean, glyptodons probably did not have antenna, but squint a little, and it could be like a half distorted recollection of a glyptodont passed down in memory. Anyways, then we got one of the best ones out there, the Sarmatian sea snail. This is like an OG snail cryptid. It's not like a worm that someone called a slug. No, it's like a proper gigantic sea snail. It's been documented in a lot of quite near present day historic sources too. Ambroise Paré has this amazing book called On Monsters and Marvels. Go and find this book. You won't regret it. It's full of these amazing depictions of all sorts of monsters. And he gives a really detailed account of these animals. Basically, he says, the Sarmatian Sea, which is also known as the Eastern German Sea, has some monstrous animals in it. Among others, there is one made exactly like a snail, but as thick as a wine cask, with horns, like little bulbs, like on branches, okay? Its eyes shine like a candle. Its nose is roundish and like a cat, with a little bit of hair around it, with a very wide slit-like mouth. Beneath that is a kind of projection of flesh. It's got 4 legs, a wide hooked pose like this, and it stays out at high sea because it's timorous. It's a pussy, basically, and it is amphibious, and its flesh is very delicate and pleasing to eat, and its blood is good for those who have diseases of the liver or lungs. So it's not like this one sighting. It's like a scientist, okay, maybe a scientist of strange repute. This guy was a barber for the king, basically, and then throughout his career, he upped his game and became this descriptor of monsters. But it's described in detail, and for a long time, people kept including this thing in like genuine books about zoology of the time. Filippo Buonanni, in the year 1684, like really made this comprehensive guidebook of like mollusk shells and other animals, basically. And then the book is called Recreatio Mentis et Oculi in Observatione Animalium Testacerum. Recreations of shelled animals or something. But here, it's like included as a genuine animal. This 229 is Cochlea muricata, and 230 is Cochlea sarmatica. So people really like assumed this animal lived in a far distant land somewhere. And of course, this always reminded me, I have to like make a side section here for these amazing childhood books I used to read. I used to read them as Bob and Bobette, but they're actually these Danish comics called Suske and Wiske. And Suske and Wiske are like these 2 little kids. They got a whole cast of other characters. There's this like the strongest man on earth. They got this kind of bumbling uncle. They got this kind of strange aunt, and together they go on these like wild adventures, but they're like extremely wild. In this particular adventure at the kingdom of the sea snails, they somehow go on a holiday, but end up going on a boat cruise. Then they catch a fish which plays a magic tune, and then they're transported to this underwater realm where they reach this kind of air pocket village of ancient Icelanders who are somehow immortal, and they live alongside mermaids. But these ancient immortal Icelanders and the mermaids, they also share this realm with these dangerous sea snails. So Suske and Wiske is like a more fantastic and slightly more childish version of Tintin. Because, in Tintin, he has serious adventures. But Suske and Wiske, there's magic fantasy and like little in-jokes all over the place. I really liked reading these books. I had a couple of them. Really recommend them. And if you grew up with Suske and Wiske, please mention in the comments so we can talk about them. In one of the memorable parts of this book, actually, one of the sea snails, they shoot these little sea urchins which are poisonous. So this little girl makes best friends with one of the immortal Icelanders. So they became best buddy girls. But then the girl is paralyzed by this poisonous sea urchin thrown by this thing. So this girl goes out to the kingdom of the sea snails and just outright goes on a genocide of sea snails. Like, we see explicit panels the girl is just shooting them and killing them. And I remember when I was a kid, I was like, okay, that's a bit extra, don't you think? But anyways, that was just Suske and Wiske, and how the Sarmatian sea snail reminded me of this nice childhood memory. Even this sea snail even made it to Carl von Linnaeus's amazing, like, original work of scientific classification. This is like of course, this is the first work which scientifically tried to classify these all sorts of animals and plants in the world, and it's mentioned in Linnaeus's work, Cochlea sarmatica. But Linnaeus is a bad motherfucker. He says fabulosa est, so he just dismisses it. What a burn! What a diss! It's fabulous. Doesn't mean it's fantastic, beautiful. It means it's just a fantasy. Fabulosa est. Linnaeus's way of saying, get fucked! Anyways. So, Sarmatian sea snail. As a verdict, it's probably a tall tale based on a forged relic. Remember, the person who first, or almost first, described this thing was a king's barber. So, he had good reason to be impressionable. And of course, back in those days, the scientific theory of classifying life was not clear in people's heads. So they took any relic as a given. So it's not very unusual for someone to have brought this guy a Jenny Hanover. So these are these amazing, strange, grotesque looking, dried up sea monster mermaid kind of things. They're actually made by cutting a stingray. This is basically, imagine the stingray would be very wide, but they cut these parts out, and then the stingray's nostrils and mouth look like the face of a sea person, basically. So they were a very popular forgery throughout the ages. So probably the Sarmatian sea snail is based on one such relic. But of course, never forget that as natural science developed from its infancy, people did not understand evolution, people did not understand how animals could be related. Now, if we saw something like this today, we would say, well, is it a primate with a derived shell? Or is it a snail with derived limbs? Or is it some other animal altogether? Because we have a framework of understanding how creatures evolve, Snail-like things evolve only from other snail-like things. Or things with limbs only evolve from other things with limbs. So we got that framework in place. But now these people, come on. Sorry, we're having a little technical difficulty here. Okay. So these people did not have that same understanding. I mean, for them, for example, this is from Albertus Seba. He's a Dutch cataloger of many zoological specimens. For them, this snake was as real as this lizard or this fantastic lizard. Now, this fantastic lizard was probably based on a kind of gecko, maybe, but they had painted the tail, or the tail looks strange, it looks like a bird-tailed weird lizard kind of thing. But of course, there were more dire mistakes. You got all these books where, like, proper normal snakes, the Elaphis or the American serpent, join or die. They're classified alongside these extremely fantastic creatures like the basilisks or cockatrice, or living in the deserts of Africa, 8-legged cock lizard snake. What a fancy creature. Of course, these people did not have an understanding of evolution in the way we do. I mean, maybe, hey, who knows? Maybe ours is a limitation. So for them, as long as it looked lizardy, it was quite natural for an 8-legged animal to appear near the snakes, as long as it looked reptilian. I mean, but of course, if this happened today, we would like, whoa, I mean, it must have diverged at the time of the earliest fish to have multiple limbs like that. But you know where I'm going with this. And of course, the most over-the-top example is this kind of hydra, classified by Albertus Seba again. This kind of turtle-like creature with multiple shark heads, and here it's painted with like surprising accuracy next to this kind of Draco lizard from I think Indonesia or present-day India. I mean, these things are real. I mean, there are lizards like this, even with this little crest, and there are also birds like this. So guy just didn't know any better. So this concludes our little aside for monsters in early zoological manuscripts. Maybe I'll do an entire talk on one of those in the future. But anyways, what if it was real? Then maybe it could be, I say, a giant form of aberrant glass squid, because glass squids, they actually grow quite large. There are 2-meter long species of these things. They're called Cracnidae or Crankidae. This particular group of squids that are transparent with like big enormous eyes. So it's not impossible for one of them to become like more timorous, as the description says. It lives near the surface and just kind of looks like this guy if you squint. It was basically the eye that drew me to that conclusion. The tentacles would resemble these antlers, some other tentacles would resemble these legs, and then maybe the swollen aspect of the body itself could be mistaken for a snail shell. Even this organ maybe could be interpreted as a shell. Who knows? Then we got an entry from France. Karl! It's this kind of gigantic medieval snail that lives in a well and comes out of the well to basically eat people and attack them. Of course, it's a legend from this particular region called Hastings in, I think, southern France, close to southern France. And of course, it's mentioned in this particular book, Giants, Monsters and Dragons by Karl Rose, written in the year 2000. She made this mistake. She called it Loup Carcol, but this is just an aspect of the French language. Loup Carcol sounds like the gangster name, doesn't it? Hey, I'm looking for Louis Carcol. Louis Carcol? Who the fuck's asking? I'm looking for Louis Carcol. Who is it? Brother of Bobby Carcol? Get the fuck out of here! And of course, it's just a legend. It's a slimy animal that could be, whose slime could be seen long before it arrived, but no human dared venture near it because the tentacles could carry people, drag them into a cavern. It had vast hairy tentacles and an enormous shell. Very interesting. Almost like the Sarlacc creature from the Star Wars saga. And there are like some other mentions of them in French books about local folklore. I don't know French, but if you can read this, it would be so welcome. So of course, the researcher probably saw this, Loup Carcol, and thought Lou was the name, but it's just an aspect of the language. Of course, most of my information comes from the amazing website called A Book of Creatures, abookofcreatures.com. It is operated by one of my friends. Maybe he likes to be anonymous, so I won't name him, but he's a really good friend from Lebanon with a thorough French and English education. And this website is amazing because not only does it provide all reconstructions in a much better way than I could draw them, it also gives extensive footnotes, references. You could actually go back and look up. So actually, this particular excerpt from this French book about the sorcery lore of this region, I found it from abookofcreatures.com. So you must bookmark this site and you must visit it. I really recommend it. It's a really good project. It's too bad it's been almost certainly discontinued now, but let's hope it comes back. And if it comes out as a book, I'll be the first one to buy it, and so should you. So our verdict for Karl, brother of fucking Bobby Karl, is a legend inspired maybe by fossils, because France is very rich in ammonite fossils. So it's not impossible for someone to see this and say, maybe it was a giant snail, and the legend kind of writes itself from there on. But if it really was something like that, like a gigantic tentacled creature that lives in a pit, I imagine maybe it could be a kind of snake, but a very special snake. Imagine these snakes that live in a colony like mole rats or ants. So they all follow each other's pheromones. So they kind of look like tentacles. They spread out from this pit and they're all poisonous or venomous. They bite people, but because they live in a colony, they got the advantage of being able to bite off parts and eat enormous prey. So they could evolve in a commensal macro-predatory pattern. So this is just my speculative take on it. Then we got the Crimean slug. which is distinct for two reasons. One, it probably doesn't belong in this thing because it doesn't look anything like a slug. Two, it's the most interesting creature we're going to review throughout this whole talk. Our story takes place in a school building in former Soviet Russia, present-day Ukraine, in Crimea. There's a school. Suddenly, an entity appears with a large head, hugely disproportionate, with big red eyes and a small square body. This illustration is from another UFO creature called the Dover Demon, but the description is really similar. So the boys noticed it. It has a little device on its elbow. It pressed the button with a clawed finger, and somehow it was sucked through the wall of the school building. And then only its red eyes could be visible on the wall. And then the boy's skin kind of got bruised where it touched them, but he felt no pain or burning sensation. The kids called this a slug because of its big head and a small body. Otherwise, it looks nothing like a slug or a snail or any mollusk. But there have been quite a lot of UFO encounters experienced by school children. Even in former Soviet countries, there was a Voronezh encounter. So what happened was this UFO landed in a schoolyard, throwing out this robot with buttons or something, and these giants with 3 eyes walked out, and they shot a light at one of the kids. How horrifying! Look at this illustration. This gigantic 3-meter tall alien with 3 eyes comes out of the bowl with a little robot friend, and the kid is like, "Niet!" And then the alien is like, and the kid evaporated. But thankfully, he came back when the alien disappeared. But look at these pictures that accompany this story. Some of the children of Voronezh, I mean, they really look like they've seen things, huh? It's really scary to think about. In fact, there have been many encounters experienced by children at schoolyards. In 1977, in the UK, there was the Broadhaven schoolyard encounter. A UFO landed and a little gnome alien came out with a kind of 2 pointed ears and maybe a cap, who knows. And then in 1994, in Ruwa, Zimbabwe, these little scary aliens came up to kids and tried to contact them. And this was really publicized, and it's one of the scariest UFO encounters I've ever read about. Unbelievable stuff. And it's also people, when they think Zimbabwe, especially some racists, they say, it's just credulous Africans. Actually, this was upscale school, and there were as many white pupils in the school as there were black pupils, and they all saw the aliens together, or claimed to. It's really scary. In fact, there are so many schoolyard UFO encounters that there's a book about them. It's called Schoolyard UFO Encounters. It's available on Amazon. You must get this book. I implore you. It's got hundreds of UFO encounters. And I don't know, there's something going on there. Something mysterious is out there. But, I mean, whether you believe it or not, you must get this book. It's a great book of folklore documentation in the 20th century, if nothing else. So verdict, obviously, is that children are smart, cheeky, and creative. I mean, even we had a memory like this. My brother, our close childhood friend, and his cousin, there were 4 of us. With our parents, we went to this vacation to Cappadocia. Now, Cappadocia is this region full of these underground cities. It's got a really unearthly, beautiful landscape, okay? So the 4 of us got lost in one of those underground cities. And so you go to a cave. The cave opens to another room. They're rooms upon rooms, and they're really out of this world. I kid you not. So my brother and my friend's cousin, we were the more timorous ones. We could only go as deep as 4 rooms deep into this cave or underground city. And in the 4th room, there was a steep shaft leading down into other rooms. So my brother and our friend, who was kind of like a naughty child, the 2 of them went down the steep shaft, and then suddenly we were like, "Hey, can you hear us? Come up, come back out there," there's like these like sounds of dust sliding about, echoes, and then suddenly there was a sound, I kid you not, and then my brother and our friend, the naughty guy, they started screaming at the top of their lungs. They climbed up, we pulled them up, we fled back out of the underground city, and then like we ran screaming back to the hotel, and there they described what they had seen. So apparently there were like these, at the bottom of the shaft there was a big room with lights inside so you could see it, and in this room there was a staircase leading up to an even bigger gate with decorations, they said. Now on the left and right of this gate there were these sphinx-like statues, but they kind of looked molten, you know. And then at the, like just as things were really going down, they said a figure appeared at the ornately carved doorway in between the sphinxes, the molten looking sphinxes. It had a Chicago Bulls hat, but it did not look like a human being, and it had its back turned to them, you know. And the Chicago Bulls cap was like the entity was wearing it like turned back, you know, so they could see the Chicago Bulls thing. Then it turned towards my brother and our friend, and they saw that this person had like a black face, but it was not like an Afro-American or an African person. It was proportioned like a white person, but they said it was like negative white. Then we were really scared when we heard this, and then the creature opened its eyes and they were like pure white, and then apparently the creature made these hissing sounds. So we were so fucking scared, I kid you not. I could not sleep for like the remaining 3 days on that vacation, and motherfuckers ruined my vacation really, because we were afraid that Chicago Bulls negative white alien entity was gonna come out of the underground city and chase us. I was so freaking scared. Of course, 5 years later, my friend and our brother, like, we kind of pulled a fast one on you. We made the whole shit up. We just wanted to scare you. Which goes to show that children are smart, cheeky, and extremely creative. Especially in a schoolyard environment, there's added incentive to like pull one over your friends, scare them, and also to ridicule and belittle the teachers and the administrators, who are not the smartest people to begin with. So that's my verdict. Never underestimate children. Never underestimate the power of human imagination. And if any of you want to draw our Chicago Bulls reverse cap, negative black, white-eyed, whoosh, ancient alien underground city sphinx gate mystical entity, please do so. I will feature it in my next video. Please illustrate this experience in your own method. I beg you. I want this experience to be illustrated. Anyways, but what if it was really real? What if something like this really existed? What if all around the world, from Zimbabwe to Broadhaven to Russia, school kids started experiencing these contacts with these alien entities? What could it be? Well, then, if it was really real, we are in for a really bad ride, because it's certainly something like the overmind. Have you heard of the overmind? I am all, says the overmind. If you read arguably the best story, not just science fiction story, but the best story of the 20th century, Childhood's End. In the story, aliens come to Earth. The aliens look like this. They look like demons, but we'll see why they look that way. The aliens come to Earth and usher an era of global peace and security. And it's like a Star Trek kind of future. But they have certain rules. They never allow people to leave the solar system. And, you know, other than that, it's a global utopia. They got such advanced technology. It's like magic. Everyone's having a good time. But then, in 3 generations, children start being born. And they kind of are prone to telepathy or this extrasensory perception. Turns out, spoiler alert, turns out these aliens are servants of something called the Overmind. Basically, it's a galactic scale civilization that operates at a level beyond monadic entities like human beings or animals. So it's a group overmind, and the children's initial telepathic or supernatural experiences, like when that generation grows up, they become a terrifying force. They destroy the earth and ascend to a higher plane of reality. And the reason these aliens look like demons is that the children's ascension to the higher plane of reality is such a momentous psychic event that it bleeds back in time and influences people's earliest nightmares of demons from the cave period onwards. An amazing book, Childhood's End. You have to watch this. You have to read it. It must be in your library. I cannot recommend it enough. So if something like the Crimean Slug was real, it's probably the waking steps of the overmind, or all these children dreaming of UFOs, or these like Chicago Bulls cap entities. They're just awakening. Anyways, then we move on. Boneless, another entity taking place in the present day UK. Basically, John Davies was an eyewitness. He was biking across a moor, and he just said it was like a massive black slug sliding across the road and up the moor. It had a head just like a whale and a white eye with a black pupil going round and round. And here's the image of the boneless slug cryptid. Now, we are living in exciting times because I created this image with Midjourney from Discord. Now, I'm not going to launch Midjourney or Discord now, but I just said giant black slug with eye crossing road in the middle of the night, vintage photograph style. And this came out, and it's just beautiful. And you know, I could just work for half an hour and turn this into a credible illustration. Just amazing times we are living in. Anyways, what if it was real? By the way, this sounds like less like an actual slug creature and more like one of those zooform phenomena. Here's our good friend Dr. Karl Shuker again. And there's actually an encyclopedia of these things. So zooform phenomena are like these black dogs or these shapeless human entities or other creatures. They're like things that look like horses with the heads of man, things that look like giant bats with single eyes, or even things like this. Now, Neil Arnold, who wrote this book, and Dr. Shuker say maybe, you know, these are some sort of psychic entity that manifests through people's consciousness, and basically they're like ectoplasm for ghosts, but only wild and cryptid-like. A very neat hypothesis to consider. So if you find this interesting, you have to get this book, Monster, the A to Z of Zooform Phenomena. And it's just a beautiful book. I mean, just even looking at the cover, I want to get it. So if there's a recommendation for you. But what if it was real? Probably it was a tall tale or a hallucination. This guy was riding across the moor in the middle of the night, may have been drunk, may have just microdosed on LSD, who knows. But what if it was really real? I mean, there are things that really look like this. It's probably an escaped giant snake, a rock python or an anaconda or something. In the UK, there are many eccentrics who keep exotic pets, so not impossible. Like, see how this giant python in the road looks really like this Midjourney image. So there, you know, not outside the realm of possibility. Alright, so we're finished with the first part of our video. But I'm not done yet, you know. I'm the gift that keeps on giving. Because we got this entire chapter coming up now on gastropod yokai and other Japanese monsters. Because the Japanese, they got this amazing tradition of monster creatures called the yokai. And a lot of them resemble snails. Now with these guys, I'm not going to do the verdict or explanation thing. But we're just going to go over them in a little summary section nevertheless. But before I do that, let me take a little sip because my throat is going sore. And while I do that, you think about all the gratis favors I'm doing for you, giving you this nice book recommendations, website recommendations. So in exchange, please consider supporting me on Patreon. The link is in the video description. Please, guys, please, ladies, even $1 makes a difference. And when you get to Patreon, you'll be able to see my depictions of amazing snail monsters for free in the upcoming days. And then you'll also be able to download this presentation. How cool is that? Okay, now it's water time for me. Taking a little bio break. Oh fuck. Some of the water just went down the wrong fucking hole. Oh my god. Okay. Where were we? Okay. Japanese yokai snail monsters. Here we go. Sazae Oni. This is the most famous one. It's this kind of giant conch monster that lives among the waves. It kind of looks like a conch witch, but it's got little eyes on it. So there's actually a really nice realistic depiction created by the very talented user at iguanadont.tumblr.com. Please visit their page. This is a really fantastically talented illustrator. He or she depicted it as this amazing, like, humanoid mollusk creature. Like, the eyes are here, the mouth is here. These hands are actually tentacles. Just really beautiful depiction. Anyways, the legend goes. Now, here's more pirate hijinks again. Some pirates were going around their ship as they would. But then they heard a woman drowning in the waves. Help me! And then they said, come on, lady. That's like, we're bad pirates. We're good pirates. They rescued her. But then they were like, we didn't rescue you for free. There's a certain amount of payback we want off your back. But then the woman was like, nanny, I could take you all. Hara, hara. And then the woman proceeded to, like, get it on with all these pirates, one by one. A veritable bang bus of pirate ship action. And then after she was done with them, she bit their testicles off and jumped into the sea. And this is why it's called hidden treasure, I guess, because the Japanese word for testicles is kintama, which is also for golden balls. I'll never be able to look at Super Mario 2, 8 golden balls in the same way again, that old, very old Game Boy game. Anyways, then the lady was like, I am no lady after all. I am the Sazae Oni. And I just bit your balls off and you just all banged the snail. How cool is that? And the snails were like, and the pirates were like, oh my god, we're screwed. But don't worry, the lady said. Just give me some gold and you can have your balls back. And so the pirates threw all their booty and she gave their balls back. So she was at least a lawful evil. I don't know. Maybe it was even worth it because, supernatural sex with a supernatural, edgy creature. If I wasn't married, I'd think twice. Anyways, this amazing story comes from Hyakumonogatari Kaidankai, the amazing website, Hyakumonogatari.com. Please go visit it. It's all about translated Japanese ghost stories and tales of the weird and the strange. And then another great reference is yokai.com, the online database of Japanese ghosts and monsters. Please visit them at yokai.com. I cannot recommend these two sites enough. And you must read these sites as you would read a book. And they're just the best compendiums. And just shows how incredibly rich the Japanese had. Incredibly rich imaginations they had. Just beautiful. Then we got Namekujira, which is quite ordinary. It's a giant reddish-brown snail, here illustrated by Matthew Meyer of yokai.com. Just walks about and leaves a snail trail. But it has also been depicted in these ukiyo-e prints, depicting a certain princess saying, howdy, stranger, to this other magical prince who is riding on a giant toad, but she's riding on the giant slug. So how cool is that? And then there's also a character named Namekujira in the famous Kamen Rider Japanese TV show. Basically, it's an evil slug, and then the motorcycle riding Kamen Rider kicks him, and he dies. This snail has also an ability to spit venom. Then this evil professor installs a computer in him, and now he can spit fire. Don't ask how, but that's what a badass guy he was. So rest in peace. Kamen Rider Namekujira. I am told, I don't know Japanese, but I am told the name is actually a wordplay, and this entire yokai was derived from this word game, because like I think Nameku means slug, but Kujira means whale, so it's a slug whale, a giant. Anyways, then we got the other yokai, Susebura. It's basically quite ordinary. If you have these giant conch shells and they live older than 100 years, they develop into a dragon. The dragon is gigantic and so powerful it can create landslides and floods. And even to this day, the story says, if people find a big cave, they wonder if it was created by a Namekujira, kind of dragon snail yokai. Then we got the giant awabi, chronicled by none other than Lafcadio Hearn. So there was a ruler named Naomasu in a certain Izuma province, okay? And in this province there was a shrine with hidden relics. Now it was like really taboo, no one could look at these relics, but the daimyo, the ruler, was like really adamant about it. Is I'm the ruler of this land, you gotta open up the hidden chamber and show me the hidden relics. And so they opened it, and then he saw it, a gigantic awabi, which is this kind of abalone shell like kind of mollusk. So he saw a giant abalone, and it changed into a huge snake 50 feet in length, and it had these like black coils, and then hissed and chased the ruler out of there, so nobody saw the hidden relics. So that's, I guess, a good portentous tale about state power exceeding its reach. So a good lesson there. And of course, Lafcadio Hearn is an amazing researcher, but before we get to them, awabi is this kind of edible mollusk, and there's a huge sub-tradition I have discovered in Japanese prints about awabi divers, just really beautiful women, all wet and sultry, diving for soft mollusks. I mean, simps simp for anime, chads simp for Misato Katsuragi, giga chads like myself here, we simp for awabi diver prints, because they're like the most beautiful depictions of Japanese ladies, let us say. And of course there are some like weird tangents of this genre too. Here's a awabi diver lady being attacked by two kappas, which are these other like cucumber creature, aquatic beasts or whatever. But going back to Lafcadio Hearn, he's a great researcher. He was born in Greece. He was of Scottish extraction. He lived all around the world. He lived in the United States. Then he was a journalist there. Like far ahead of his time, he married an African American lady. And because of this, his reputation was tarnished. He was cancelled, as right-wingers like to point out these days. But he was cancelled for the correct reasons. So he was really like, he fell on bad times, and somehow went to Japan, and then he founded a second family there. This amazing guy. Greek, British, Scottish, Irish, Japanese. Amazing guy. And he has these amazing books about Japanese cultures and stories, and the story of the giant awabi comes from his book, Glimpses of Unfamiliar Japan. You must get all of these books. Like if Lafcadio Hearn even wrote a telephone number, you have to get and read it. He's an amazing writer. Strongly recommended. And then finally, in our big series of yokai, Snail, Slug, Cryptids, we got the parasitoid yokai mentioned in the Hara no Mushi Atlas of monsters, diseases personified as little monsters. This is just an amazing series, and you must go to bogleach.com to read about it, because I'm not going to tell you all about them, because the patron of Bogleach, Jonathan Wojcik, does a great job at it, and he has amazing illustrations and amazing descriptions. So go to bogleach.com and read it. And I'm just going to give you a little excerpt about the only mollusk or gastropod looking one here, and it's called kanshaku or hiki, a liver mass or fat spirit. So it starts like a slug in your left armpit, and it causes pain at your pectoral muscles and makes your chest sore. The victim's face pales with anger. They become very angry, irritable. They also develop strange carvings. They want sour foods. They hate oily foods. And on bogleech.com, not only are all these Hara no Mushi yokai explained, the author also gives plausible medical explanations for them. And this particular one, the kanshaku, is probably a placental pregnancy, a pregnancy in the wrong part of the womb, and it just creates these pains. It's just awful. Anyways, that was it for Japanese snail slug yokai. Like what a gift, huh? The gift that keeps on giving. Because I also got a special chapter now for additional forms from art history. I did a lot of research for this podcast, so I came up with some little details from Western art history that I just couldn't catalog as cryptids, but I'm just gonna share them with you anyways. So in the tradition of Gnostic jewels, Gnosticism is very complicated, started out in late Roman times, like a kind of hidden folk belief among tradespeople, let us say. There are these jewel symbols which depict all these like strange animals mixed with snails. So you got all these like elephant snail beasts, you got the bird and snail beast, you got the dog snail beast, ram snail beast, the donkey snail beast, and my particular favorite, the twin tavshambani snail beast. Just amazing. So like there are a lot of Gnostic jewels like this, just look them up. And then there was this one particular drawing by Hans Brosamer in 1538 about the image of Venus and Cupid, but the seashell has been replaced by a snail. Just beautiful. And also there's an amazing artist named Andres de Melgar, and he's known for a lot of fantastic decorations, but he's got a thing for snail monsters. Here's like a half pirate ogre captain blowing a lion stork heron snail monster. Here is another dragon snail. Here is something like a dog called Flameria. I don't know, flamenco, who knows? A dog snail. It's really beautiful. And just look at the quality of the penwork here. Amazing. And then here's like a big dog monster with a demon riding it, talking to smaller human dog wing monsters and this mosquito nose antenna monsters. And there's even a whelk or abalone multi-feeted caterpillar dragon monsters. So just amazing. And this guy just had a good fun time. He knew how to enjoy it himself. This just inspired me to pick up a old ink and nib pen and just illustrate monsters. And then there was one other snail image I found by an artist named Jose Posada. People fighting against a giant snail. And here I think it's a political message. The snail is probably the oppressor class, but the people are having a revoluzione against the snail. Shooting and pulling it down with ropes. Down with the evil snail. And of course, closer to the modern day, you got all sorts of pseudo-gastropod creatures inhabiting the Star Wars universe. In the Coruscant, the city planet, you got these steel slugs and concrete slugs. They live on buildings. The planet has been covered by a city for so long that animals have evolved to adapt to city conditions. In asteroids, there are the giant asteroid moon slugs, which are enormous. And then in the Dagobah system, where Yoda lives, there are these gigantic predatory swamp slugs. And then, of course, in the Dungeons and Dragons universe, there are many monsters, but the most notable among them all, for our purposes, is the flail snail, which has like flail-like antenna. It's a really cool design. Just really like this beast. I just think they're neat. Anyways, this concludes this amazing podcast covering all sorts of snail and slugs from real life, amazing snails and slugs. We covered a lot of cryptids from cryptid lore, like ranging from plausible animals all the way to UFO encounters. And then we covered all sorts of yokai. And I would like to thank all these particular contributors, because a few days ago, before producing this show, I said I'm researching snail, slug, gastropod cryptids for a new YouTube video. Who likes to help out? And these people came forth. Nala Ripov, thank you so much. Jonathan Wojcik, thank you so much. He's also at bogleach.com, so look it up. Tim Morris, thank you so much. Colin Eamon, thank you so much. Hexen H, Samuel Millerick, Thoughtful Devil, Noam Hessler, Tired Man, Torgo, Nico K. Thank you so much for your suggestions. You made my research so much more easier, and as I promised, I am crediting you here. And I would like to thank all of these people for supporting me on patreon.com. You too could be among the righteous, the chosen, the Hyakumonogatari. Just join me on patreon.com. The link is in the video description. Even $1 a day really makes a difference, you know. I mean, just remember the coffee I almost choked on a few minutes ago, you know. I bought that coffee thanks to your Patreon contributions. And in this day and age, prices of everything is going up the roof. And slowly, your Patreon support is moving from a nice-to-have windfall into a vital part of my life. And I cannot thank you all enough. I will always try to produce only the best content, only the most comprehensive research for you all. So thank you. And if you support me on Patreon, you will be able to see and download these presentations and see my snail monster cryptid drawings in the future. And also, please, one more, if you're watching, please try to illustrate the Chicago Bulls cap inverse negative black white eye underground monster. Please, please guys, I just want to see it from your own hand. Anyways, that was all. Have a nice day. This has been CM Kozeman.